Marcus Silva was accustomed to a simple lifestyle. At 45, the war veteran was torn between his job as an Uber driver and his efforts to provide a better life for his children. Despite his regrets, their routine finally seemed to stabilize after the nightmares of battles abroad. He had returned to Brazil years ago and decided to move on. The pain in his legs, the sleepless nights, and the memories of combat were burdens he carried, but the greatest of them continued to be racism. No matter how much he tried to live in peace, there was always someone who reminded him of the color of his skin. That morning, he was in line at the supermarket, buying ingredients for the family's dinner. The list was simple: rice, beans, ground beef, and vegetables. Something simple for any night. But that day, nothing would be as expected. The smell of freshly baked bread from the nearby bakery seemed to ease the tension in the air. Suddenly, a siren broke the silence. Marcus, already accustomed to the sound of police cars, didn't even turn around. The country was going through a difficult time and there were always police officers around, but something about that moment drew his attention to the approaching police car. The car door opened with a bang, and Officer Henrique Costa quickly stepped out. The man's cold gaze seemed to assess Marcus from top to bottom, as if he were a threat just because of the color of his skin. "Hello, sir, can I see your documents?" Henry spoke harshly, without explanation. Marcus, with a tired sigh, placed the shopping cart on the shelf and looked for his wallet. "Sure, here they are," he said, trying to remain calm. I already knew what was coming next. Henry looked at the documents and, without saying a word, made a sudden gesture with his hand. "You're in the wrong area. I need you to walk me to the car now." "But I'm just buying my food," Marcus replied, trying to explain. The response was a strong shove in the chest. "I didn't give you permission to speak, sir. Now shut up and follow me." The police officer's tone of contempt and anger made something inside Marcus snap. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to argue. But the act of humiliation was already consummated. Without another word, Henrique stepped forward and, in one swift movement, pushed Marcus to the ground, punching him in the head. The impact was so strong that Marcus passed out instantly. When the streetlights were turned off by the darkness, the last thing Marcus saw was Enrique's face, arrogant and impassive. Marcus's body was taken to the hospital in an induced coma. The incident, quickly covered by the media, spread like wildfire. Protests began in the streets. Society knew that this was yet another case of police brutality. And what no one knew yet was that Marcus's identity was about to change forever. The hospital was silent, except for the constant sound of the monitors and the murmur of nurses moving through the rooms. Luciana, Marcus's wife, couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that consumed her. She held tightly to her husband's hand and looked at the swollen, lifeless face of someone who had been her support for so long. The doctor who treated Marcus gave a grim prognosis, speaking of the risk of permanent brain damage. But Luciana wouldn't listen. She just wanted to see her husband again, to talk to him, to hear his soft voice. While Luciana was in anguish, Marcus's case began to take shape outside the hospital walls. In the world where police brutality seemed routine, Marcus's attack sparked outrage among many. Social media was abuzz with hashtags calling for justice. Civil rights organizations pressured the local government to conduct a thorough investigation. On the other side of the city, Henrique Costa was in his car, driving slowly through the streets. The sound of the siren still seemed to echo in his ears, and Marcus's gaze, still clear in his mind, bothered him. He felt a growing uneasiness, but he didn't know how to deal with it. He was used to being the hero of the story, the exemplary police officer who did everything necessary to protect society. That's how he had always seen himself. At the police station, Henrique's colleagues congratulated him on the speed and efficiency with which he had dealt with the problematic individual, words that Henrique took as validation. But inside, he felt something different, a feeling that bothered him and that he could not understand. The incident with Marcus did not leave him. Meanwhile, Augusto Costa, Henrique's father, was at home with the television on. He was watching the news, where they were talking about police brutality and the case of Marcus Silva, the man who had been disproportionately attacked. Augusto, staring at the screen, remembered a man, many years ago, who had done him a great favor. During a fire in his store, when he was trapped in the flames, Marcus was the man who rescued him, but he never knew his name. His unsung hero. The memory mixed with the present, and she felt a shiver down her spine when she realized that Marcus's name was now linked to the case of police brutality. Henry didn't know it yet, but the man he attacked for no reason was connected to his past in a way he never imagined. Henry could no longer free himself from the weight of guilt. The violence against Marcus, even in his rational mind, made no sense. He knew the system, he knew how it worked, and he knew that his action would not be justified. But what tormented him the most was Marcus's gaze, that gaze that he could not forget. Something there seemed to say more than he understood, but Henry did not know exactly what. He began to question his own beliefs, everything he had always considered normal in his work. In the following days, Henry found himself increasingly distant from his fellow officers, who treated him with a disconcerting naturalness. They saw no problem with what had happened. To them, Marcus was just another suspect on any given day. For Henry, however, Marcus's face was still vivid, and he could not find peace. That's when something stopped him once and for all. During a seemingly trivial conversation with his father, Augusto, Henrique discovered information that would change everything. Augusto, when explaining the health crisis he was going through, casually mentioned an episode from the past that Henrique had never heard of. "Do you remember the fire in the store, my son? That was when a man saved me, a hero. To this day I don't know his name, but he was a black man. He was there to help me." Henry stopped mid-sentence. His mind began to race, connecting dots that had previously seemed disconnected. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Father, this man, was he Marcus Silva?" he asked in a shaky voice. Augusto's reaction was immediate. Yes, he was the same. Do you now understand the gravity of the situation?" Henrique remained silent. There were no words to explain the tension in his chest. The man he had brutally attacked on the street was not some random stranger, but someone who, years before, had given his own life to save his father's. With this discovery, Henrique began to investigate more about Marcus. He researched files and records and soon confirmed Marcus Silva, the war veteran, was the same man who courageously and without hesitation rescued his father from a devastating fire. The feeling of guilt was overwhelming. He had acted against a hero, against someone to whom, deep down, he already owed a life debt. Meanwhile, protests surrounding Marcus's case intensified. Pressure on the police increased, and social media never stopped calling for justice. Henrique felt the weight of his choice, and the internal struggle grew even more intense. Now he knew he could not go back. But he wondered, how could he correct such a big mistake? Henry felt lost. He could no longer look in the mirror without seeing the man he had become. Someone who had brutally attacked a hero, someone who had let racism and prejudice shape his actions. Every time he thought about Marcus, about how he had been attacked for no reason, Henry felt a pain that seemed to go deeper than any physical injury. The days dragged on, and he began to distance himself from his colleagues at the police station. The laughter, greetings, and complicity of the other police officers no longer made sense to him. Henrique wanted to disappear from there, but he knew he could not run away from the responsibility he carried. If he wanted any kind of redemption, he would have to face his decisions, not only in court, but also within himself. In a moment of bravery, Henrique decided to go to the hospital where Marcus was hospitalized. He needed to see with his own eyes the consequences of his actions. When he entered the room, he saw Luciana, Marcus' wife, sitting next to the bed, her eyes red from crying. She looked at him with contempt, but didn't say a word. Henrique didn't know what to expect, but her look was enough to make his heart ache. He approached slowly, unsure of how to begin. "What would you say? Sorry." But what could that really offer other than empty words? Luciana, with a cold gaze, spoke before he could express himself. "You are the man who did this to him, the man who destroyed my life." He took a deep breath, trying to control his rising anger. "If you came here to apologize, understand that this is not enough. He is in a coma because of you. There is no regret that can erase this." Henry lowered his head, feeling helpless. I know I can't fix what I did. I know I can't turn back time, but I want to help. I want to do something for him, for you." Luciana didn't answer right away. He stood up and left the room without looking back. Henrique stood there alone, staring at Marcus's inert body. He knew he couldn't expect immediate forgiveness, but this shook him in a way that words couldn't express. In the days that followed, Henrique began to look for something. More than a way to apologize, he wanted to act. He began to investigate the case further, trying to find evidence that Marcus had been a victim of abuse of power. He knew that the system he was involved in would try to silence the case, but he could not let that happen. Now, more than ever, he knew he had to fight for justice, not only for Marcus, but for himself. Henry couldn't rest easy until he did the right thing. The case of Marcus Silva was beginning to take on new dimensions. Public pressure on the police increased every day, and the demonstrations in front of the police station became more intense. The media did not let the case be forgotten. The incident appeared in newspapers, on television, and on social media. For Marcus's defenders, it was clear that he had been the victim of unjustified police brutality. But Henrique knew that, contrary to what many believed, this was not a simple case. As the trial approached, Henrique became more directly involved in the investigation. He began working with lawyers and human rights organizations to gather evidence that could substantiate charges of abuse of power. With each new piece of evidence that emerged, he felt the pressure mounting. He knew the truth had to come out, but at the same time, his own guilt was eating away at him. It was not enough to expose what had happened to Marcus. He also had to face his own responsibility. On a muggy Thursday afternoon, the hearing finally began. The case was the center of attention. Luciana and Marcus's children were present, their eyes filled with pain and anger. Henrique entered the room wearing the thickest uniform ever. "I knew it would be a confrontation, but I wasn't there to fight with anyone." He was there to confront the truth and, in some way, redeem himself. When it was his turn to testify, Henrique couldn't look at Luciana. He knew he didn't deserve her attention. His voice was strained, and he began, "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I know I can't undo it. I attacked Marcus Silva without any justification. Let me be clear, he did nothing to deserve what happened. I was blinded by prejudice, and that led me to make a decision that destroyed lives." The courtroom fell silent. Henry's words echoed throughout the room. He looked at Luciana, who for once did not glare at him. Her expression was calm, but it was obvious that the pain was still there. "I don't expect forgiveness. I know words aren't enough. I just want the truth to be told. Marco is a hero. He always has been. And I treated him like an enemy. Today, I'm here to try to make amends for what I did, so that the system that allowed this doesn't happen again," said Henrique, feeling the weight of each word. Luciana, who had previously seemed impassive, stood up and walked to the front, facing Enrique with a dignity he would never have expected. "You did what you did, but you won't be able to erase what happened. What you're doing now is the least you could have done from the beginning. I just hope this helps others in some way, those who don't have a voice, those who don't have a hero like my husband." Enrique nodded, speechless. The tears he had been trying to hold back finally came out. I didn't know if forgiveness was what I could achieve, but I knew that this was the beginning of something much greater, true reparation. And together with Luciana and the people who fought for justice, he finally felt that somehow redemption was possible.